Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, Stormont's end-of-term report would likely criticise the quality of public services and highlight the shortage of money. We'll discuss a tumultuous week in health with an opposition politician and a representative of GPs. We'll hear about the pressures on policing and the PSNI's budget. And how has the Westminster government performed? We'll have analysis from London after a year of Labour. The problems and pressures on our health service came to a head this week. The Health Minister sacked the chair of the Belfast Trust over culture problems in the cardiac surgery unit. The following day, GPs voted in favour of withdrawing some services as part of their fight for increased funding. Plenty to discuss with my guests. Colin McGrath is the SDLP's health spokesperson and Dr Francis O'Hagan is from the BMA. Welcome to both of you. Colin, if I can start with you, Kieran Mulgrew has been sacked. You welcome the move. Why?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that we play the ball and not the player here. I welcome the opportunity that there now is to reset the culture within the Belfast Trust, which was very worrying for those staff that were involved in bullying and trying to report that through and felt that they weren't being listened to. Those people, and there are dozens that came to me and other politicians in the past number of weeks, and the message was all the same. They felt like their claims weren't being taken seriously, they felt that they weren't being listened to, and in some instances they felt like they just couldn't raise the issue because what was the point? So that culture was there. We brought the Belfast Trust to the Health Committee, and I can say that after that appearance at the committee, I wasn't assured that the culture from the very top was in the right place to deal with those issues. That's why we kept the pressure on. That's why the Minister, I feel, took the decision, and that decision is right for those 22,000 staff. What we need to see now, that culture change. There's a new chief executive, there's a new chair of that trust board. They need to immediately implement systems that mean that staff feel that if they are under pressure, if they are being bullied, if they feel that they are stressed in their working environment, that they have places, procedures, methods to be able to raise that so that they can go to work and do the job. Because if we've got a good health staff, then we're going to have good health outcomes for people.
Well, I think everybody who appeared at that committee would say that they do take all of those issues seriously. And Kieran Mulgrew was in post for 2 years. All of this that happened at the cardiac surgery unit was first brought to Chris Hagan, the medical director's attention in 2019. So has Kieran Mulgrew been scapegoated here, because this all predates his time by quite a significant time margin?
Again, I think we look at the position. He is the chair of the trust board. He is the head of the organisation. If there are substantial problems within that organisation, then it's up to that trust board under his leadership to address that. Many of those issues that relate to the building and the delays in delivering those, yes, of course they predated, but many of the issues that were ongoing in the cardiac department, many of those issues that have come to light over the last number of weeks, where I literally have had dozens of people contacting me about the concerns that they have, they are all recent. But it's not that, it was the attitude that there was at the committee. It wasn't, OK, we know there's an issue, we're going to go in there, we're going to address it, we're going to grasp this by the nettle and get it sorted.
Well, they would say that they did have that attitude, and you know, if you read the transcript or you watch the committee back, they were very clear about the meetings that they'd had with staff, and they had gone to great lengths, they would say. But just when you say a lot of people have been in touch with you, we did invite Kieran Mulgrew to come in for an interview. He declined, but we understand that he has also received many messages. I'll give you a flavour of a couple of them that we have seen. You showed great courage and integrity. You're one of the good guys. You are an honourable man. I believe you've been made a scapegoat. That's 3 separate messages, and there are a number of others there. He may well be feeling quite aggrieved that he has been the one person to take the hit for this.
So I don't doubt that somebody does not go in and completely 100% preside over something in a disastrous way. I know that there was a lot of good work that went on. I know that the Trust had done a lot of good work to try and address this, but it wasn't doing enough. And whenever you've got people in front of you in a committee that say, well, do you know what? Yes, there was lots of bullying. Yes, there were issues that need to be addressed. But you know what? The outcomes were okay. that is the clink in the door that allows people to say, well, it's all right to do what you're doing if it's negative. That is unacceptable for those 22,000 staff who have to be able to go to work each day knowing that if there are problems, there will be a robust system that will address it. That wasn't there, it still isn't.
I mean, you can appreciate that people watching who maybe have a family member or are, you know, could in the future be patients. That is the number one priority. It has to be, the patient safety has to be the number one priority. So are you saying that more people should go? What about the culpability of senior officials in both the trust and the department? Because obviously none of these things happen completely separately. There are people working on the cardiac unit. There are people who are working on the refurbishment of buildings who are within in the trust, but also within the department.
I think one of the things that has come out of this process, and of course having 5 years with no assembly from Sinn Féin and DUP hasn't helped us, as we've drilled down into the issues, we've kind of realised that the department has been quite powerless in places to influence what has happened in the trusts. They are very much independent organisations to do what they need to do. There are certain lines of accountability. I think we might need to address that. That is something that I'm going to work on over the summer. I know that Peter McBride has been put in with the level 5 interventions to try and look at that culture and find ways of improving it. I think that there needs to be, in terms of complaints within staff teams, problems within staff, if that ultimately goes through a complaints procedure to somebody that is responsible to the very staff that are causing the problems, then it's a system that's not working. I think that needs to be reviewed. In terms of the culture, having a new chief executive and having a new chair of the committee, that is a start. But I want to hear from those people in the weeks ahead that their number one priority is going to be to address that culture so that staff feel safe at work.
Okay, Colin, I just want to bring in Dr. Francis O'Hagan. I mean, the Health Minister is the common denominator here. There's a kind of conflict happening between the Belfast Trust and the Minister, and it seems to be the same with GPs. What can patients expect from your collective action that GPs have voted to take, Francis?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, Tara. The Minister is the common link here, and it's the Minister that said to us that negotiations were over and he was imposing the contract. It is the Minister's gift. It's in his hands to say, no, I'm going to come back and talk to GPs about this year's contract.
Well, he did say that remains open to discussion as to how best to secure the future of general practice. So the door was still open, was it not?
No, the door's not open for this year's contract, Tara. He has asked us to come back to the table to discuss next year's contract, but it's this year's contract that the vote was taken on that we're in dispute for. So we want to revisit this year's contract to try and improve the outcome for patients so that we can bolster up general practice and provide more appointments.
What will it mean for general practice then? What will patients notice? What services are you withdrawing?
Well, as I want to make very clear, we will withdraw nothing if the Minister comes back to the negotiating table. But if he doesn't, well, then we have to look at what services we are providing that are not part of our contract and stick to our contract so that we can try to provide more appointments for patients.
So things like what? Be specific for people watching.
Well, for example, there's lots of things we're doing that's not part of our contract. You know, an easy, simple one is, you know, it's not part of our contract to do ECGs. It's not part of our contract to do bloods from the hospital. It's not part of our contract to follow up investigations that are carried out in the hospital. That's up to the clinician that actually undertakes an investigation. It is their responsibility to follow them up and get the results back to the patients.
But that sounds like the pressure then is going to go on the emergency departments and on the hospitals. Surely that's not what you want to see when they're already so stretched.
No, that's not what we want to see. But remember, we're very stretched, Tara. And, you know, we didn't ask for an awful lot. We asked for £39 per patient per year to improve services. That's not.
But that figure, I mean, people will appreciate that doesn't sound like a lot. But when you look at the overall budget, you're looking for £80 million from a department's budget that is already in shortfall by £600 million. These are difficult times for everybody.
Yes, I appreciate that. But to be offered 50 pence per year per patient, i.e. less than a penny a week to improve access, I don't think many people will disagree with me that less than a penny per week is not going to improve access in any which way.
What about dissatisfaction rates with GPs? There could be a sense among people watching this morning of a collective sigh that they already feel that perhaps some GPs are not providing the service that they did before COVID, that it's difficult to get through, it's very difficult to get an appointment. The appointment systems have been completely transformed. There's very often no such thing as an appointment in the future anymore. You have to phone on the day, and if you can't get through, then you're left. People might feel less sympathetic towards you perhaps than in the past.
Yes, and I mean, things have changed since COVID, and it was the government that insisted we make that change. The problem is that since COVID and even before that, the number of patients has increased dramatically, but also people are living longer. So elderly patients are living with more conditions, which means that they need more care and more appointments. We have less GPs than we had, less whole-time equivalent GPs than we had before COVID. So we're trying to do more with less. And what we're doing at the minute is we're seeing 200,000 patients per week in Northern Ireland. That's 10.1 million appointments per year. But clearly that's not enough. And if it's not enough, then we have to have a service that can provide enough. And the only
just very briefly, we're nearly out of time. This collective action that you're taking, do you reserve the right to increase that to something else if the Health Minister doesn't come back to you?
That was something that could be considered down the line.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Thanks both of you for joining us this morning. Now, this weekend marks 1 year since Sir Keir Starmer entered Downing Street as Prime Minister. It's been a difficult 12 months for the new administration. Let's get the thoughts of Gerry Scott, Assistant Political Editor of The Times. Gerry, thanks for coming on Sunday Politics. We're told the PM has no plans for any sort of major celebration. That's not really a surprise.
No, it's not, especially given the year and in particular the week that the Prime Minister has had. He finishes this year with his personal popularity at an all-time low. Polls this weekend showing that if there was a general election tomorrow, the Reform Party would be the biggest party in a hung parliament. So it's not that he's got quite too much to celebrate, to be honest.
I mean, losing the support of so many MPs that forced him into this U-turn over welfare reform. What's your analysis of how he got things so badly wrong on this one?
Well, the Prime Minister admitted himself, and there is a question over how wise it is to have admitted this in an interview, that he was distracted before that vote, that he hadn't really realised the scale of that rebellion. And there is some sympathy with that argument that, there is a lot going on the world stage geopolitically at the moment, essentially trying to stop World War III breaking out is very important. But there has been this ongoing feeling amongst his backbenchers that they're not being listened to, that they're not being shown kind of enough love, basically, from the centre, that, that he doesn't know them, that he doesn't talk to them, that he doesn't understand their issues. So there is that. And then because this is the Labour Party and this is a welfare vote, it went straight to kind of the soul of what a lot of people think that a Labour government should be doing. So there was kind of the practical day-to-day stuff there, but then there was a more kind of ideological argument for a lot of these MPs, which really ended up pushing them over the edge.
Yeah, and it's difficult for a Labour government to stand by things which make poor people poorer. And I mean, you mentioned the world stage then. I mean, on the positive side, as Sir Keir Starmer looks back over the year, some of the global interactions he's had, the trade deals, his relationship with President Trump, those would be seen as plus points for him, I imagine.
They would, and actually even his political opponents, so in the Tory party or in Reform, have praised his kind of work on the world stage. And it's impossible to say that isn't important. We live in an increasingly kind of volatile world where, the old world order doesn't really apply anymore. So it's clear that work needed to be done, and that has been done. But that does have consequences at home, as we've seen with that welfare vote, with that U-turn over winter fuel payments. There's been a lot that has had to change that wasn't probably in the plan.
Yeah, he did an interview with the BBC's Nick Robinson yesterday, and he was asked again. It was recorded on Wednesday, but it was put out yesterday, and he was very emphatic about continuing to support his Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She's also had a pretty tough week. How long do you think that can continue? Because that does seem to be, he says they think the same way, they discuss the same way, but how long can that go on, do you think? Is she safe and secure?
In a quite perverse way, she's actually more secure than she was before Wednesday, before we saw those tears in the comments, because of the reaction from the bond markets. You know, what we saw is when the markets thought that she was for the chop, they went pretty mad, and, you know, to levels that we last saw Liz Truss's mini budget. So actually, she's in a lot more of a secure position than she might have been earlier on in the week. And there are a couple of things to say on this. First of all, it is true that many MPs have been kind of knives out for Rachel Reeves. They have been blaming her for a lot of the decisions that have been made. But what you should kind of recognise is that MPs do always blame the Treasury because they're the ones that hold the purse strings. And then the other thing to say is that I think it would be very, very difficult for the Prime Minister to get rid of his Chancellor, not only because it's so early in a government, but because of the thing that he was saying to Nick Robertson. He has tied himself so closely to the agenda that she is pushing that to say that he doesn't have confidence in her would be tantamount to saying that he doesn't have confidence in himself at this stage. So, look, I don't think she's going anywhere, at least not in the short term. They've guaranteed that she will be the Chancellor into the next election, but of course that is only if she wants to be.
Will he still be Prime Minister this time next year? Is his position secure?
Oh, God, I'm not a betting woman, so these are questions I always find quite difficult because politics can change so quickly. But I do think he will be, simply because I don't think if you're one of those people, say Wes Streeting or Angela Rayner, who might have their eye on the top job one day, I think you don't want to take over the party at this current stage.
Okay.
You know, I think it's very tricky to see him being replaced in the short term.
Jerry, thanks very much. Now, each week over the summer, the Red Lines podcast will bring you one-to-one interviews with high-profile figures from the world of politics. In the first episode in the series, Mark has been speaking to the former Ulster Unionist leader, Doug Beattie. Let's get a flavour of what that interview said now with our political correspondent, Jane McCormack.
Doug Beattie joined the army in 1982. He served 3 tours of Afghanistan and rose to the rank of captain.
And there is a degree of kinship between the Royal Irish soldier and the Afghan. And that does help us to understand a country of conflict, because we've come from a country of conflict ourselves.
But now he's opened up about conflict he experienced as a Northern Irish teenager in the British Army.
I went and did my training in Taunton in Somerset, and because I was an Irishman, and I've always been an Irishman, you know that, I was beaten quite badly by the instructors, the people who I was looking up to, and I found myself bullied quite badly as a young...
For being a paddy?
For being, yeah, from coming from Northern Ireland. It doesn't matter I was a unionist, doesn't matter my father was a military man. The fact that I came from Northern Ireland and
That's why they saw you?
Yeah, absolutely they did, and I found myself being bullied quite a lot, and beaten quite a lot as well. So that had an effect on my life.
He's no stranger to the political battleground either. In the podcast, he spoke for the first time about the internal battle which prompted his resignation as party leader last year, after a row over who should replace Robin Swan as North Antrim MLA.
And I wasn't being dissuaded by those people who wanted to get me to change direction. So whenever it got to the stage where it was quite clear that I could no longer influence the party and they weren't supporting what I was doing, then it became really difficult for me to stay on. And all of the things I wanted to achieve, I guess I was being pushed away from being able to achieve it. And in the end, the decision was, although it was my decision to step down, the truth was I had no choice.
Doug Beattie said he'd been bruised by his ousting 11 months ago, but has no plans to quit politics and may even run again for the next Assembly election.
And you can listen to the full episode on BBC Sounds now, with new episodes dropping every Wednesday. Now, let's turn to the funding issues facing the PSNI. Liam Kelly is from the Policing Federation and Alison Morris is the Belfast Telegraph's security correspondent. Welcome, both of you. Liam, the riots in Ballymena and elsewhere really showed how much pressure the PSNI is under. How would you characterise it?
Well, PSNI has been in a crisis and has been in a crisis for some time, and I think that was a sharp reminder when we had that disorder right across Northern Ireland last month. Just showed that PSNI really hasn't got the resilience that it needs, and that's been something that has been a result of years and years of underfunding, which has now manifested itself that PSNI are finding it very difficult to cope. So our Chief Constable, since he's come into post in 2023, has been asking for more funding for PSNI, and so far it hasn't happened. And unfortunately, in the lead up to the June monitoring round, we were getting more platitudes, more warm words, more warm and fuzzy feelings that we were going to get the funding that we actually needed, that the recovery plan that the Chief Constable had put in was going to be funded. And what did we get? We get £5 million just to cover the cost of money we'd already spent for the disorder.
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? And we've already had this discussion about health, and we know all of our public services are under extreme pressure. I mean, you are in a fortunate position in that you could ask for officers from Scotland or from elsewhere to come in and help, and hopefully we don't have riots every month. So is policing the priority? You'll obviously say it is for your officers, but in terms of the overall picture, your officers still need a good health service. Their children still need to be educated. We're under extreme pressure. What is it about policing that says you should get this money?
Well, the problem is policing hasn't been the priority, and it clearly isn't the priority for our government. But the reality is the policing is the glue that sticks everything else together. I mean, we are constantly doing stuff for the health service. Things that aren't policing matters, but the reality around it is it's a necessity for us to do it. And then when we talk about stepping back from that, which is the right care, right person approach, the health service then say that they can't cope. But the reality for us is that our numbers have decreased to such a point is that we're actually, as the Chief Constable himself has said, is we're now getting to the point that it's becoming dangerous, not only for our communities, but for our officers as well.
I mean, 1,700 officers took 1 month or more off work last year because they were sick. That must make the operational running of the police even more challenging. Is there any way to get those numbers down?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, even during the disorder last month, we had 107 officers who were injured as a result of that. And coincidentally, we had actually launched a campaign last month as well, which is to shine a light on the number of assaults that our officers are inflicting on a day and daily basis. That's 9. That's 63 officers every week are being assaulted and taken away from their duties. And we want to make sure that the public are aware of what those numbers are. But ultimately, we need to bring that number down. And we need the public, and we need the judiciary, and we need our politicians to get together to help us to do that.
Alison, I just want to bring you in on this. We've had a lot of kind of public fighting about this week, and I'll ask Liam about his relationship with the Justice Minister in a minute. But what do you think? How unseemly do you think that has been?
I don't think it does anything for public confidence, which already isn't great in terms of the justice system. I mean, we have a Department of Justice, as you said, if you went out into the street and asked 100 people if there's extra money, where should it go? They'll probably, 99 of them will say health. But the fact is that justice impacts on every part of our lives. We know we have a real problem with femicide here and domestic abuse. And if that isn't dealt with, we have repeat offenders who are then escalating that to extreme violence or even murder on occasions because it hasn't been dealt with properly by the justice system. We have an overcrowded prison, which means people are being bailed who should not be on bail. All of that has an impact on public confidence in policing. We've seen that there's been damage to public confidence in policing, even in terms of the riots. And while nobody could say there wasn't frontline officers stopping people from being injured and potentially even murdered during those riots, there is a perception that on some occasions police maybe stood and watched rioters and didn't intervene, and that has then damaged public confidence.
They didn't have backup. I mean, the Chief Constable has been very public in his attempts to convince and persuade and even embarrass the executive into giving him more money. Has he gone about it the right way, do you think? Would a soft power approach, would behind the scenes not have been better?
Well, I think John Boucher is a very different character to Simon Byrne, and Simon Byrne did take that softly approach and tried to negotiate behind the scenes, and it didn't really do much good. Policing was then left underfunded year on year. John Boucher isn't that type of Chief Constable. He is very outspoken, and when he sees the fact that, you know, that he has asked for this recovery plan and it's not being met, he is the type of person who's going to come out. And also, he's very media friendly, as you know, so he will come and speak to the like of you or me if there's a problem within policing, whereas some Chief Constables maybe tried to work behind the scenes. That's maybe showing that there's going to be some grating between himself and the Department of Justice. But at the same time too, I think that helps with officers' confidence in their leadership, backing them up.
Liam, what about you? What's your perception of that relationship between John Boucher and the Justice Minister, Naomi Long? Are they kind of fighting against each other when they should be trying to come together? Do you feel that the Justice Minister is not supporting officers enough?
Well, it's a difficult one because they have to have a professional working relationship, but ultimately this is about delivery. The Chief Constable for some period of time has been impressing upon the Justice Minister and our executive around the funding, and the recovery plan, I suppose, was the first step in PSNI being able to regrow and rebuild. And unfortunately that first step has been denied. I mean, we had the ridiculous scenario of the government saying it was value for money. However, they didn't have any money. But ultimately, on the here and now, we are struggling as a police service, and we need our Justice Minister and our Chief Constable to try and impose and and get our executive on board here that we need this funding and we need it now.
I just want
later.
to say a couple of things about Naomi Long. She tweeted that the Finance Minister has made it clear he is recommending the recovery funding over the next 3 years in the spending review. She said there's due process which needs to be agreed, and yet you responded to her saying you respectfully disagree. Is that helpful?
Well, unfortunately, I don't put spin on stuff. I say it as I see it. And the here and now, as I've said, PSNI is in a crisis. We don't need funding in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, a year's time. We need it now. And the reality around it is the Chief Constable, because he hasn't had the funding this year, he has to operate at risk. It is him that has to put the money forward, the resource forward to try and bring more people into service. And the reality around it is he hasn't got that money, it hasn't been underwritten. We have a £21 million deficit this year.
Well, he did get £5 million, as you've already said, for the riots.
That means he would have had a £26 million deficit. The £5 million didn't make operationally any difference to PSNI.
But then we know that the health budget is in £600 million deficit. I was putting those points to Francis O'Hagan.
Yeah, the reality for PSNI, we have the same budget that we've had since 2010. In 2010, we had over 7,200 officers. So fast forward to today, we are significantly under-resourced. And the issue is the cracks are starting to appear. We're not in the communities that we need to be. Victims are being let down, and these are independent bodies who are coming in and looking and stress testing what PSNI are doing. And we're failing, and we're going to get worse unless this is turned around.
Alison, I mean, do you think it is a fair characterisation? Because we have this single discussion from all the groups now, whether it's water, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's policing, but nobody's really suggesting how to raise money. There is no money tree, as we keep being reminded. So how do we square these circles?
And the problem is we have an executive where ministers are working individually. They're working in terms of their own, I suppose, department without a collective responsibility. And the problem is that when we do see deficits or problems that exist within various departments, such as Gavin Robinson coming out and criticising the Justice Minister in relation to the policing money, saying, well, this hasn't been passed by the rest of the executive. Surely that was a problem that you walk across the corridor to your executive colleague and knock the door and speak to them rather than releasing public statements. I think that for the public's sake, we see ministers who are working almost to a party political agenda rather than working as a collective.
But is that fair? Because there could be an argument to say around the executive table then that she is saying, well, look, the emergency money is the $5 million to cover the riots. The recovery plan can be put back, but actually GPs' pay can't, or what's happening in emergency services absolutely can't. Special needs education, all of these things where extra money is needed. Is she just being pragmatic?
And all are equally important, as you say, and especially for that person at that time. And justice is one of those things you don't think it's a priority until you're actually involved in it, until you're actually a victim of crime or you find yourself before the courts. People don't really think about justice in terms of that kind of priority. Just one word, Liam, do you have confidence in the Justice Minister?
I do have confidence in her, but she needs to deliver.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Thanks, both of you. That's all we have time for this week and indeed for this political term. Sunday Politics will be back with a new series in September. Don't forget the Red Lines podcast every Wednesday on BBC Sounds. Have a good summer. Bye-bye.